This video is partially sponsored by Slave Chief. With the code HIL5 you get 5% of your order while supporting the channel. Go shop now. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are here with Enrico, who with OP14 just around the corner has update his Ace guide. You can find the guide in the description below, and by using the code HIL10 you'll get a nice 10% discount. Hi Enrico.
Hello.
How do you feel about the OP14 meta?
First of all, thank you for having me again on the channel. It's always a pleasure. So the OP14 meta is going to be a very interesting one, I think. This is also what I mentioned on the guide updates. We are going to shift from a very closed meta to a very open one. So it was very tough to find the hours to test everything out,
The jungle.
understand all the matchups. Yes, the jungle is back. So it was not easy. I had to put a lot of hours into my testing because there are a lot of new decks from the new expansion. We have the new ST29 coming up as well, and all the old decks they will face a lot of new tough matchups. I think we shift from a meta where Ace and Imu were like much more powerful than all the other decks, while now there are really good counters from OP14. But these counters get countered by other decks, so it's the classic jungle meta where we have like every deck being good against like 3 or 4 decks and then having 1 or 2 counters. So it's gonna be a very open one because people can say, okay, I will just play the leader that I feel the most comfortable with, or they just do a meta call, or they just say, okay, I go into a tournament, I do expect a lot of people playing deck X, Y, or Z, and then they just try to counter pick. Like we saw in Asia as well, like Mihawk was one of the most populars. That's probably because Mihawk is a really good counter to Imu and Ace. But then Mihawk as well, he loses to other decks. So yeah, I think it's going to be very complex to figure out which is the best deck. There might be no best deck as well. But yeah, it's very interesting to figure out which deck is going to be the best at the end of the format.
Now, looking at your list of Ace, I couldn't help but notice that you included Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, and Roundtable, as well as the absence of Cavendish, a card that appears in many of the lists currently circulating. What led you include this card, and why did you decide to cut Cavendish?
So my list is quite personal, I would say. I tested Ace quite a lot. I still think he's one of the best decks. He's not like full tier 1 like he used to be in OP13, in the sense that like in OP13 I think Ace was the best deck, together with Imu, of course. In this format, he's one of the best decks. He's not the best, but it has a really good matchup spread, but it struggles a lot against Mihawk. So my reasoning behind the list was, okay, I need some tools to navigate that matchup better, to find some ways to have more consistency in winning that matchup. And I found that cards that can reduce the attack power of very sticky pieces that Mihawk has access to were the best solution. Not having the Cavendish is purely based on the fact that I have like really limited flex spots in this format. This is also what I mentioned in the guide. Is like, I think sadly you need to make choices in this meta, especially for Ace, and understand which matchups you wanna set up your deck list for. I believe the ratio between popularity and strength, the best ratio is like Mihawk, and so I think that Ace needs to set the list up for Mihawk. So that's why I decided to run both cards. I think the Ace, Sabo, and Luffy is like not really that bad as like committing the deck list, because it's like a 2k. So in the end, it's not really heavy as a card in general. I think in the format, the card is also pretty nice because we see in a lot of decks like some really sticky pieces, and giving like a -3 to most of these pieces is sometimes good enough to trade them. Especially against Mihawk is like Usually the -3 to the Tashigi or Tashigi, I never know how to say it. It's one of the best solutions to deal with it early on, because it's one of the most annoying cards in the matchup. Also, you can use it to trade the Shanks, the 7-cost Shanks. You can use it to trade, for example, against Doffy, the Virgo. So what I've noticed in OP14 is that we shifted towards a meta that is really focused on combat and board control. And I think cards like this that are not really giving you any downside because it's 2k can be very, very powerful. And we gave up also the Uta that I think is much less powerful in this meta, and the touch as well. So the 2Ks that we used to play that were like kind of mandatory in OP13, I think they're not good enough anymore. When it comes down to round table, this card is purely based on like the Mihawk matchup. I found myself using this card quite a lot in other matchups. I think in the mirror match is also quite good. But the reason to play it is just because I think of all the tech cards you can play against Mihawk is like the most powerful. Because Mihawk is gonna rest his big bodies most of the times. And for 4 down, you can just trade one of these big bodies by using one of your searches, for example. For instance, you can do like -10k to the Shanks and then just trade it with a Garb. That's already good enough. And the problem with Mihawk is that if you don't deal early on with the threats, or like as we go into the game, you don't deal with the threats as soon as possible. If they start to stack up and like they start to have like 2 or 3 big bodies, they're just gonna snowball and you're just gonna die. So I think it's important to have cards like this. The choice to not run Cavendish is purely based on the fact that I don't have space. I used to play the Cavendish quite a lot, but I had to cut it for the round table. I think the card is good. I didn't find myself saying I won this game because of Cavendish, honestly. If you like Cavendish, you can play it. This is also what I say always in the guide, but just in general, when I try to explain my choices behind decks or like deck lists are always based on like my personal experience. I don't think Cavendish gives you enough edge against the bad matchups to justify the presence of the card. Also, you need to see it on curve and only when you go second. So I don't like to run these cards that are like really situational. I got a lot of questions about other cards and like, why don't you run this or that? Most of the times my answer is like, okay, this card is good only when you go first or second in only this matchup or that matchup. So I always try to build my deck list based on like cards that I can play in any part of the game, beside of course the core part of the deck.
I'd like to start the overall matchup question by asking if anything has changed in your overall approach to the previous decks when playing Ace. In particular, I don't think the mirror match has changed much since it didn't receive any new support. But when it comes to Imu, does the matchup become harder due to the increase of the defensive spells?
So in regards to the old matchups, this is also what I mentioned in the guide. I don't think there was a big change, honestly. For the mirror match, as you mentioned as well, it's basically unchanged. If you decide to run the round table, so if you decide to run my build, you will have one extra tool to deal with the block gates, and it's pretty good because a lot of times you will find yourself saying, okay, I will just red rock this guy and play, for example, like Marco, or like just push. With the round table, you will have more chances to trade and then do like bigger plays. You open yourself to also doing like round table trade, a new gate, and then Josu, for example. So I think the card gives you even more edge in the mirror match. I still stick to 3 red rocks because I think the card was insane in the old format, and now is even better because you have more decks relying on like big pieces that you can just remove with red rock. But in general, I think you just apply the same principles. You prioritize ball control, life management. You want to stay at 2. Hand size doesn't really matter. You just want to play around putting as much as possible without going to 3 cards in hand. But yeah, in general, I think it's unchanged. Zoro just disappeared, so I won't talk about it. I hope nobody plays this deck anymore.
Mihawk replaced
And
it.
yeah, Mihawk replaced it. It's a bit better, I think, because Mihawk is kind of like the fusion between Bonnie and Zoro. So he's still a bad matchup, but he's like more manageable, I think. He's less eye roll, I believe. And then the Imu matchup is like basically unchanged. It's a little bit worse because now they have access to more counters, but depending on like which game plan you do, sometimes it's basically unchanged. Like if you go second, I don't think it's gonna matter even if they have like a lot of +4s. If you develop an early Roger like on Tendon, you will win 100% of the times. But at least if you see everything on curve, it's gonna be tough to lose. I don't think the extra counters are gonna be enough for them. When it comes down to like developing a late Roger, it might be a bit more risky. This is also what I mentioned on the guide. It's a bit riskier because they have more access to the other events, but just keep in mind that those events you cannot search. So when they end up being a late game, they don't really have enough resources to like dig a lot. So they will almost always just search the never existed. I rarely found myself losing because they had more counter than they used to have in the OP13 format. So going second, I think, is still like an insane matchup for us. It's very hard to lose. Like you need to miss a lot of things. Going first, this is also what I wanted to mention is that late to the OP13 meta, people figured out very defensive strategy against Imu. I think that strategy still works, but it's going to be tougher now with the new counters. I think it's still the best probably to just develop this strategy. You just block everything. You try to develop a lot of block gates, and then you just try to create a stalemate. It's not easy. You need to see everything on curve, but it's a plan. So I do believe when you go first is a bit tougher than before. Going second is unchanged, but still I think Ace is likely above Imu in the matchup in general. So if you're afraid that the new ground def are gonna destroy you in the matchup, I don't think it's still enough. I think the deck needs something else because when they go first, they will struggle no matter what.
Okay, now talking about the new OP14 deck, we can start by talking about Mihawk. Like we said, has essentially replaced the old Zoro deck. It has the ability of apply heavy pressure every single turn using cards like Shanks, making cheap blockers ineffective. And they use the low Beppo to slow down the Ace game plan, maybe. How do you evaluate this new matchup?
I think the Mihawk is a tough matchup because the real problem is that we don't really have a lot of time to put pressure on them. The deck is really defensive and like it kind of puts a clock on us. I think what Mihawk needs to see on curve when they play is like the Tashigi, because she's basically an 8,000 that can swing every turn, and also thanks to the leader effect, they basically swing with 8 with the leader as well. So since they have a lot of 8s, they can just push every turn. We don't really have a lot of time. We cannot stack a lot of cards in hands because we don't really have. We are under constant pressure as from like turn 5. I mean 5 dons. And the problem is that they will need to stack up pieces that we need to deal with because they are really big, like the low Beppo, the Shanks, the Mihawk. I don't think the Mihawk is that good in that matchup, but like it's still a 10,000. It's hard to remove for us. That's why we want to run like a lot of removals. The real problem of the matchup is the low Beppo because he can basically chain freeze our blockades, and that's the real issue, I think. And it's also 11k. It's really tough to remove. So I think that's the biggest problem about the matchup. Aside from that, I think if you can kind of like play on curve early on, because the Mihawk is quite weak in the first turns. So if you can establish an early pressure and swing for a lot of 7, sometimes as a green deck, it can break a lot. That's why the Shanks is so good, because they can kind of slow you down in the mid game by decreasing the power of all of your characters. And that's why the round table is so good, because sometimes you can just round table the Shanks, deal with it, and then push with everything face. If they reach the 10 down with a low Mbeppo with like 1 or 2 life, they won't be healthy enough to withstand long turns. But then it's really important to not ignore their pressure, because the real problem is that the deck has access to a lot of tools that they can use to just get rid of our blockers. We cannot hide behind Anuta. We cannot hide behind Marco. We cannot hide behind Blockade most of the times. And also the most annoying thing is that they have access to Demonic Aura. That was like one of the best counters against us in the past. And they can also just play it for 1, basically, because they can just use 4 dawns, use leader effects, rest any searcher or like the stage, and then take back 3 dawns. So it's really important to not take random damage early on. Stay as healthy as possible, deal with the threat zone curve, and then try to develop some kind of pressure, especially early on. If they don't see the Tashigi on curve and they see like, I don't know, a Perona, for example, you can just bounce it back with Josu. That's a really good tempo play. If they develop the Tashigi early on, it's going to be tough because you cannot really get rid of that. So I would prioritize maybe getting more cards in hands to survive. Most of the times they will go face. So like if they try to trade, it means they don't have the Shanks probably. But yeah, if you deal with the Shanks early on, you can push multiple 7s before they become a 7k base power, and then it's easier. I saw a lot of like some Asian players that trying to change the list to be more aggressive, but I don't know if that's kind of glass cannon strategy. I'm not sure that works. I think if you see everything on curve, it might be a really good strategy, but it's less consistent in my opinion. But yeah, in general, it's not an easy matchup. I think it's not as bad as Zoro, but almost.
Moving on to Boa, another new OP14 deck which aims to trigger key cards from the life and then finish the game bringing you to 0 with the new Boa and the old Parfum. How do you approach this matchup? When do you usually start attacking? And do you tend to keep your life high to avoid the 20k phase?
I got a lot of questions about this, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm still not 100% sure that my strategy is correct. I'm testing a lot this matchup, and I think it's quite complex because I'm switching in between EB03 and not. So against Boa, my decision about swinging or not is based purely on like if they either set up their first life or not. Usually if they start with like Yori or Gloriosa, I tend to wait at least like 2 turns to start swinging until I have access to like Atmos and Josu. So if I do have access to them, then sometimes I swing, because the real problem about the triggers is not really like there is only one trigger that you don't want to see on board, and it's like the Gorgon Sisters. That card really destroys you because Boa is a deck that wants to play on curve, and if they play on curve most of the times they cannot swing at you, so you should be okay because you can just stack up cards in your hands and survive long enough to then put pressure on them and try to win the game. But if they do trigger the Gorgon Sisters instantly, then they will push a lot because they play on curve and then they assign the downs to all the 5Ks and then they swing quite a lot. Life management is really important. You need to stay high on life. I tend to stay at 3 life as much as possible. Of course, you need to understand when you need to take at least 1 damage because otherwise you won't have enough cards to play. And the most important thing with Boa, I think, is to understand how much time you have left. Because, of course, the 9-cost Boa is the win condition for them. And the real issue is that not only they can get back life and they have access to triggers, they also have access to events that can basically block a full blockade swing. So I think also You'll Frighten Me, I think is called the card. It's one of the biggest problems in the matchup because you don't really have a reliable way to set up lethals because they have access to so many annoying events that sometimes it's like very difficult. But in general, I just tend to develop pieces on curve. I tend to keep the Josu for like when they have Gorgon Sisters on board. I think that's the most annoying piece to bounce back. I try to stay healthy because I know that sometimes I might end up having like a 4-cost boa blocker on board, and they will sacrifice it no matter what. So I will lose a life anyways. So if you stay healthy enough, at least sometimes you can manage to push even if you know that you're gonna lose a life, for example. The Atmos is really good because you can bounce back that card. The Josu as well. You can bounce back basically everything except for the Kuma. I mean, when they play the Kuma. The turn after, you can bounce it back. And then, yeah, I think cards like Red Rock are still decent. Sometimes they might set up lethal with the Boa, and then if you Red Rock the Boa, they might need to go with the leader like 15k lead, and it's realistic to just block it. You need to respect the pudding. You need to respect the Slave Arrow, Fridemy, sometimes the 0-cost event as well. Like, so many annoying things you need to respect. I think the real issue about the matchup is the fact that you cannot really predict everything and you need to play around too many things. But Bob breaks a lot. So if you manage to put a little bit of pressure, for example, if they don't start with a Yori or a Gloriosa, I just win face as from turn 1. I will take always the gamble because, as I said before, the Gorgon Sisters is the only trigger that really matters. All the other ones are just 5Ks, and if they want to play on curve, they won't push enough anyways. But except from that, they might take too much damage early on and just lose like that. Also, the Gorgon system sometimes is like double-edged sword because they show you 3 cards, and I can tell you from a person that played Boa quite a lot, the deck breaks a lot. So sometimes they might swing like, you might swing 7 or 8 and they need to take. So hand reading is really important in this matchup. If they give you information, try to remember them. But aside from this, I wouldn't starve. Starving fully, I tried, it doesn't work. So I either do like full face or I try to just wait the first 2 turns and then I swing when I know I can bounce back the Gorgon Sisters if they trigger that. Other than that, I never trade. I think it's almost impossible to trade. Some people ask me about Gravity Blade. I think it can be a really good tech card, but it's basically good only in this matchup. So to be honest, I wouldn't run it. Aside from that, I think the best way is to just understand when you can afford to go face and when not. So if you know that the trigger is going to destroy you, you just don't swing. You wait for Atmos and Jaws. Otherwise, you just go face.
Let's now talk about Purple Doflamingo, the last new deck introduced in OP14. What do you think about this new deck and how do you approach the matchup accordingly?
So Purple Doffy is one of the easiest matchups, sadly for Purple Doffy enjoyers. The real problem that Doffy has is that he cannot really deal with big bodies except for like Divine Departure. So the real only thing that you need to think of is like this card. They need to invest 6 tons to give -8 to one of your pieces. So like it's the only way to deal with the blockades. They also have access to the Noro Bean Sword. I think that's one of the most annoying cards because even if you want to respect the Divine Departure and not rest the blockades, then you need to understand that they can just rest it themselves. I think the biggest mistake that I see from players against this deck is that they try to aggro them. I think the Purple Doffy is the most defensive deck in the whole game that I've ever seen. So I think the focus should be always on like trading the board and prioritizing the pieces that you need to deal with as soon as possible. The Virgo is like the most annoying piece. I think is one of the best ways that they had to deal with your board. So if you can manage to deal with it as soon as possible, then you have to. Keep in mind that the Doffy needs to reach 8 downs as soon as possible. So it's quite important to understand sometimes even like doing a Josu on a Virgo, if they get locked into 7 downs instead of 8, it can be a good play. So just keep in mind that against the Doffy, you either want to keep them at 7 downs or 9 downs, because then they don't have access to the 10 cost or the 8 cost. The 8 cost and the Virgo are like the 2 key cards for the deck. So you need to deal with those as soon as possible. And I always play for ball control in this matchup. I tend to go face when there is nothing else to trade, or like at least to bait cards. My swings are always based off the leader effect. If they still have leader effect on, I tend to swing based on like the biggest body they have access to. But then if they have like a 9 or 10k, then I just ignore it and I just swing normally basically. So like 5, 7s, whatever. But for example, if they have a 7k on board, I always tend to do like all 7ks, or like I go with a small swing and then I go with a big one, for example, because they usually don't want to use leader effect on like a really small swing. Generally speaking, I think the matchup is quite easy. You just need to play on curve, develop pieces, go wide. They struggle against wide boards. They really struggle against aggroing you. So the only way is they have to like stack a lot of 8-cost Doffys and then push with them. Aside from that card, they don't really have a way to push. The 10-cost Doffy is not that good against us. The Virgo is quite nice, but it's not insane. Also here, the round table is really good because you can use it to deal with any threats. They usually rest all the pieces because they feel comfortable behind the leader effect. The Ace, Sabo, and Luffy is also good to trade the Virgo as soon as possible. You can go 6-on-4 most of the times. And then if you deal with the Virgo, sometimes you can also red rock the big guys. If you trade the board to Doffy, there is no comeback for them. So I would always focus on the board control. If you can stack multiple blockades on board, then it's going to be easy. Just remember that you don't have to rest them randomly because they can just divine departure and trade them. When you start having like 2 or 3, you can just start resting them because they can rest them with the Noro Bean Sword anyways. The only small spot that I think it's quite redundant is when you get access to the 8-cost events, and that turn you want to sign the dons with the blockade. They do have 2 dons open in that spot. I usually swing first and then develop the blockade because I don't want to play the blockade and then they rest it, and then on their turn they just trade it. Because if you play the first blockade, they rest it, and they trade it as soon as possible, then it's going to be tough because they're just going to snowball from that spot. So it's really important to develop first and then expose the pieces.
And speaking of a brand new deck, I'd like to talk about ST29 Luffy. I've seen several different builds going around, some running 8-cost Kid, others focusing on the Thriller Bark package. How do you usually approach this matchup?
I think the ST29 is a really good deck, but sadly struggles against 6k leaders. So it's a good matchup for us. Especially without EB03, I don't think this deck is that threatening for us since they don't have access to cards like Nami, Nico Robin, the new ones from EB. The deck really plays on curve, but they don't have any way to assign dons rested. So they struggle normally against 6k leaders because of that reason. It's basically the same as the Boa, but they don't have access to a card like a Gorgon Sisters. Some people is running the 1-cost Luffy from the ST29 because he can assign a rested don. But to be honest, I think that card is not good enough to deal with the matchup. In general, you don't need to do anything crazy. If you play your curve with like bounce package, you can deal easily with them. They don't have any way to deal with the board. Mostly they don't run anything to rest your pieces. You only need to understand that they have access to an unblockable event. They can swing for 14 with their leader, unblockable. Triggers they have access to, I will study the triggers. They have Kikunojo, the new Sanji, this 1-cost Luffy that I just mentioned. They have like the Bonnie trigger, but like it's not really good enough. So I wouldn't try to starve them. These decks are also quite weak to putting, so sometimes you can just put in them and win the game. Just be careful with your life management. I try to stay as healthy as possible because then they can burn in the late game life with Kid or like 9-cost Pony. If they do have access to EB03, I would take the first damage because anyways at 5 down they will just play the Nami and burn your life and you won't use leader effect. So I prefer to just take the damage when I have a Dawn assigned and stay at 2 life for the most part. Other than that, I think it's quite easy as a matchup to navigate. The deck is quite predictable. You can just play on curve. And once you have big guys on board, you can slowly try to kill them. And then when you feel safe, you just go all in. Don't try to do crazy details. They have access to zero cost event. They do play the Flame Dragon to sort their life. So sometimes they might have it as a last life. They can trigger blockers. They can trigger a lot of annoying things when you try to close the game. So if you can drag the game for a turn longer, just do it. I think the biggest threat is trying to go for lethal when they have access to triggers. Other than that, if you play on curve and you play safe, you should be okay.
And to wrap up the matchups, the last one is UP Luffy. And it's rising in popularity after the release of Roger, of course, and its current World Championship qualification in Asia. How do you approach the matchup?
I think Snake Man has always been a problem for Ace, because it's one of the very few decks that can it's basically like a mirror match, but they do have access to multiple big bodies. The 9-cost Sanji is of course the biggest problem, because it allows them to develop 2 bodies when you can only develop 1 per turn. So like your red rocks are basically useless. I think with a new build with the round table, sometimes you can deal with 2 pieces, so it's a good addition for sure for that matchup. The matchup in general is quite tough, because they also have access, they're very fast. They have access to the Sanjis, the very sticky pieces and very annoying ones. And also they can basically search every turn for a solution. So imagine a mirror match where they can search the red rock every turn. That's really a big problem. And also a mirror match where they can develop 2 big bodies per turn. That's the real issue about the matchup. I think the best way to navigate it is go in second, of course. Deal with the Bonclays early on. If they develop a Bonclay, it's really important to deal with it, because they will just leave it there until you get to your first 10 cost. And when you do that, they will have a 12k on board. And that's really a big problem. So if you can bounce it in the early game, then you have to do it. Once you reach the 8 down, you need to push. You need to push a lot in this matchup. I think you need to put them to at least 1 life as soon as possible. Force them to play around pudding, respect the giants, try to get multiple pieces on board, like 6-7k bodies. The Snake Man struggles against multiple bodies, because they don't really have a way. Some people is still running Gravity Blade, but if you are fast enough, they won't have time to do it. So if you play, for example, Marco into Josu into 8 cost into block 8, you should be okay. And then you start poking them. In the early game, it's really good to do 6 and 8s. And then in the late game, I tend to do 6 or 10s. Of course, if you have a block 8, it's a 12, so you don't need to assign any downs. But then if you can put them at 0 as soon as possible, then it's going to be much easier to win. I think this is probably the toughest matchup in the meta, but also super winnable. The die roll is quite important. But yeah, basically you navigate this very similarly to a mirror match, but you need to play more aggressively, basically. Don't try to play defense, because in the long run you will lose 100%. They have access to a lot of resources. They search a lot. They have really good counters. If you see a window to push, you just take it, because in a lot of turns there will be 8,000 thanks to the Roger. So it's really important when they are 6k you push. But don't neglect developing bodies back to back. For example, if you can play a 10 cost into 10 cost, it's really good. The Roger is not really that needed in this matchup, but sometimes it can be useful when they try to hide behind a Nami. But yeah, other than that, I would say develop on curve, push, try to put them at 0 as soon as possible. Deal with the board only if you can remove them, for example, with Roundtable or Red Rock. Don't try to trade. I think it's not worth it. The pieces are just too big. So yeah, just go face.
Face is the place.
Yes, basically.
Perfect. And with that, this is the end of the video. I'd like to thank you, Enrico, once again for joining us.
Thank you.
And as a reminder, if you want to dive deeper into the deck, you can find the updated guide link in the description. And bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.